Ntracts is changing the way organizations think about contract management. Not just a repository with a few dates and reminders, Ntracts automates the contract origination and ongoing management of contracts via industry-leading workflow tools. What's more, Ntracts delivers an innovative business model that provides our clients fixed fee and unlimited use of the product, so there's no more questioning how much the bill will be next month or next year. Further separating Ntracts from the competition, it was founded in 1987 by Hall Render, a leading healthcare law firm in the United States. This partnership enables Ntracts to stay ahead of ever-changing compliance matters as it relates to contracting in healthcare organizations. In fact, had you bought the product in 1992, it would have been called CYA for Contract Yearly Assessment, of course. Now Ntracts, today, one instance of the product is capable of supporting an organization of any size, no matter how many entities or hospitals it might have within it. So let's take a look at how Ntracts uses workflow automation to manage the contracting process in one of our clients. In this example, an Ntracts user, possibly a business owner, is presented with some choices that will tailor the screen that follows. This screen over here is effectively their contract cover sheet that used to be in PDF form. What we want to do is capture as much information from this user as possible so that we can provide the next step of the workflow an actionable request. The cool thing about this screen is that it is dynamic. So if I were to select an independent contractor versus an employee, the data that is next required from this user may change based on the answers that they've given us. Of course, at this point, we can attach any documentation, whether it be a vendor's contract or quality care measures in this example. We take all of this data that is captured from this user and we create the contract record inside of Ntracts for you. We want to have the natural progression of the workflow drive the collection of data into the contract record. We also take the data that was captured in that survey and we use a tool called Hot Docs, which lets us build draft agreements using our clients' templates so that we can merge all the data and insert all the appropriate legal language. In this example, the system is actually looking at the data that was captured by this user and is determining whether it needs to go to compliance for review. If this person tries to enter data that is outside of our normal compliance standards, before encumbering legal, the system will route this directly over to compliance for their approval. And even the text and what happens if I click this button or that button is all tailored by our client in a custom workflow. As the workflow continues through participants, we use things called action notices. An action notice is simply a task that tells someone, hey, this is on your desk, we're all waiting for you to do your part of the contracting process. Inside of the contract record, we actually store a full history of all action notices or steps, so we can see who approved of what, when they opened it, when they completed it, what their due dates were. It gives us visibility to know whose desk a contract is on at any given moment. When I receive an action notice via Ntracts, I can see exactly what's happened prior to me, every iteration of the document, all the notes and comments from the prior participants so that I know what I'm supposed to do with this. And this is simply to say that if this were a lease or recruitment loan, the system itself knows how to route and who to route the request to. In this example of a custom workflow, we actually incorporate DocuSign, drop in our digital signature blocks, and use the app to get things signed rapidly. The other neat thing that this workflow does is provide a communication tool to the rest of the organization. We use these things called courtesy copies, so once we execute a contract, we're sending the information over to other parts of the organization, to other departments to tell them this is what you need to know for your system. So fast forward, Ntracts is sitting upon thousands and thousands of contract records with all kinds of termination dates, all sorts of review dates, all sorts of other data that may dictate some sort of review by the organization. Ntracts proactively manages this process by seeking out those records and actually initiating a workflow or sending an action notice again, saying this contract is going to terminate in 90 days, 150 days in advance. We're sending notification to someone, presumably the business owner, that says, what are we going to do with this contract? This person can then solicit input from others and collaborate with other people in the organization to come up with a determination of what we need to do with this contract. We can then update the system, and once that change is made inside of Ntracts, notification is sent to all parties involved. There are a lot of benefits of workflow automation. Visibility is probably the most tangible thing that organizations see immediately, is knowing whose desk a contract is on at any moment, how long it took to get there, how can we make processes better. Certainly, compliance gets a hold of this and is very excited because we can have uniform processes. We can make sure that we're doing the same thing the same way every time, that we're gathering all the appropriate approvals, that we're getting all the right documents in place for every contract that we execute. So let's take a look at the data we store inside of a contract record. In this example, this is contract record number 1027. You'll notice that there are a lot of tabs. These gray or blue tabs are system tabs, and they remain the same with every instance of Ntracts. These orange tabs are what we call custom tabs, and those are built custom to each client. They correspond with what type of contract this is. So they don't always show, they only show when I select, in this example, a physician agreement. They'll show when I select a physician's employment agreement. The other data on here is a BAA required, some other general housekeeping information, where does the contract reside, who has the authority to close it. Moving over to the data sheet, this is the data that's actually in the contract. What are all the dates, who are the parties, what are the values of the contract, so on and so forth. Inside of here, I can maintain multiple versions of a data sheet. So every time I have an amendment, I can title that amendment and maintain a full history within one contract record of what this looked like. Now, not all clients actually do that. We also have this related contracts tab. This is where you can tie this contract to another. So, of course, all the drop-down values that we see in the system are configured to each client. But in this instance, I could associate this contract record with another contract record in the system. So let's go over and take a look at documents. And really, documents should be called files. Ntracts can store virtually any kind of file associated with a contract record that you'd want. We use a field called document type, which again probably should be file type, but we use a field called document type for you to designate what type of document is associated with this record. And it enables you to come back at a later date and run reports that say, for a certain type of contract, show me all records where I don't have a certain type of document on file. All files that get added to the system are indexed and searchable. We talked briefly about actions. Again, actions are tasks assigned to people throughout the workflow associated with a contract record. And in this instance, there's only one action, but if we click on it, we can see who it was assigned to, when it was assigned, and what their notes were as related to this action. So let's talk about these custom tabs. Again, custom tabs are built specifically to your specifications. All the data that we capture here becomes searchable and reportable as it relates to this contract record. This is where we'd like to see you get rather granular in terms of capturing physician compensation, because it gives us something to be able to validate time with should we want to incorporate the Crow-Horvath Physician Links product. We can also use custom tabs to create very specific pieces of information that we want to share about a contract record with other departments in the organization, where they may not need to see all of this other information. So we can create windows into the contract record and present whatever data we want to present. Or in other instances, we can load accounts payable data for a contract record to see what was the spend on that record and compare that to what we had contracted for originally. So let's take a look at another contract record and see how we can work with documents inside of the record. I have the ability to edit this document inside of my browser. Our in-app editor allows us to collaborate internally with other users. I can mark certain parts of it, add questions, and have ongoing communication with people inside of the organization, so I can see all the chat and comments that are occurring. Of course, I can redline from here and edit the contract as need be. One of the new features we've just added is the ability to now take this contract that we've redlined and send that shell over to the opposing party. So I can send a link to the opposing party through a feature we called Outside Party Interface. When they get that link, they can actually open this in the editor, or they could download it onto their system, make their edits locally, and re-upload it into our system. Our goal with this feature is to get away from the emailing of contracts back and forth. Unique to Ntracts is our address book. It's one source for all names and organizations inside of the system. If I go over to the organizations and pull up AT&T, I'm able to see all contract records associated with AT&T from one source. Show me every place they're a primary party. The other thing on AT&T, I can go in and I can say, do I have a BAA on file? I can check this box. If you recall in the contract record, there's another checkbox that says, does this contract record require a BAA? This makes it real easy for me to run reports that say, show me all the contract records that think they need a BAA, where we don't have one on file for one of the parties. The address book is also a valuable tool for helping me manage workload within the organization. You'll notice here that I've selected Brandon, and Brandon has been a loyal employee for a long time, and he's a party to a ton of contracts, the business owner and responsible party, and a number of different roles in the contracting process. Well, Brandon here has decided that he's going to go seek out greener pastures, or maybe he just got promoted into a new role. But either way, Brandon's attached to a lot of contract records, and when we start sending out notifications around termination or review or any kind of other process, Brandon will not be receiving them at this point. So since we have an address book, we can actually substitute records and keep our data more accurate inside of the contract records by managing the workload between people. In this instance, again, Brandon here is listed with where he's a responsible party in 48 instances. I'm going to select all of those and say I'm going to move those to Jerry. I'm going to transfer all of those over to Jerry Hallett. Begin that substitution. Okay. We're now updating 48 contract records with Jerry's information, making a notation in the history that we've made that change, and keeping my Ntracts contracts database up to date and in sync. Another new feature on its way is called the Address Book Interface, and we are adding a Documents tab and a Custom tab to these sets of tabs. We can then say for the vendor type of AT&T, we can designate what type of documents do we need to have on file for this type of entity. The system will then ping that entity, send them a link where they can provide us those documents and upload them into our system. Let's talk briefly about our ability to search for contracts inside of Ntracts. Every field inside of the system is searchable to the extent you have the authority to see it. I can build very filtered, very detailed searches. I can go through and say, show me all physician employment agreements and add that filter, and add any number of other criteria to my search and say, show me all that are a contract status of X. Or on the physician tabs, show me where hourly rate is equal to Y, and build very complex searches. From here, I can hit the search button, get a listing of 14 records, and easily run reporting right from here if I want to. Now, this is not intended to be our reporting function, but it is useful at this point to be able to say, oh yeah, output this data right here to an Excel report for me. So let's talk about reporting. Inside of Ntracts, every user can have their own dashboard, and a dashboard could be made up of a pie chart, a number of other reports that they'd want to throw onto here, websites, and so on. We provide you more standard reports than you'll probably ever care for. We can output those reports in virtually any format that you would like. What most of our clients do is duplicate these reports into their own personal library and then edit them using a very simple filter. We also have a report writing wizard that will help you write reports. Again, every field in the system is reportable to the extent you have the authority to see it. Another handy feature is that I can schedule reporting inside of the system. So if the CFO or whomever wants a certain report on the first day of every month, the system can automatically email that report to that user on that day of the month. So let's talk about security inside of Ntracts. Inside of Ntracts, we can have multiple organizations, and then multiple roles associated with people in those organizations, and then associate people to the roles. We can define broadly what a role is allowed to do inside of our system, and then we even can break the role rules at the individual levels. So we'll take an individual here as an example and see what level of granularity we can get to, whether it be at a role or individual in the system. So I can say for Amy Dilcher here, we're going to give her contract record access to just University Hospital. She has contract read and write. No other access. And we could come back at a later time and say give her just view summary only at the Children's Hospital. We can tailor this to different roles within the organization. We saw the accounts payable tab earlier. I could allow them view access or read and write access. I can designate whether someone has access to workflow. So while I'm able to have security set at a role level, I can break those rules at the individual level if I have to. And I can manage virtually any type of security specification or requirement for any user or role inside of the system. Our goal at Ntracts is to provide our customers predictability in their annual spend and transparency into what they're getting. So we go to great lengths to designate every single feature that is included in a proposal and exactly how much that will cost every year of the agreement.